Maple Leafs top prospect Easton Cowan wins the Memorial Cup. He is a champion. Can he deliver one to Toronto? We'll discuss Cowan's prospect status and what expectations for the stud moving forward, and what is the latest in the Mitch Marner saga. You're listening to the Locked On at Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day.
You're Locked On Maple Leafs, your daily podcast on the Toronto Maple Leafs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome into the Locked On Leafs podcast, a daily Maple Leaf-centric podcast hosted by myself, Mike DiStefano, and my co-host, Dave Morassutti. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. And Dave, there is currently a bet on FanDuel in the novelty tab in the NHL section of what Mitch Marner's next team might be. A little bit later on, we'll take a look at what the odds are, who the top teams he's being linked to, and what we think might end up happening going forward with Mitch Marner. But we got to start with Easton Cowan, Dave, because the man's a champion. The man's a Memorial Cup MVP winner. And boy, did he ever have himself a tournament.
He did, and kind of exclamation point on also being really good at last year's tournament, but the London Knights not being able to win the Memorial Cup last year. So he gets the job done this time around, and kind of a nice bow on a really impressive career for Easton Cowan with the London Knights. Yeah, because you just kind of saw a player that kind of went on a good ascension, right? As a prospect, you know, he gets drafted. Everyone's like, why did the Leafs pick this guy? And then ever since the Leafs drafted him, it's like, oh, okay.
Oh, that's why. Gotcha. Makes sense. Yeah. He's been outstanding over the last 2 years. Like his D+1, D+2 seasons have been outrageous. Last year, he had 96 points in 54 games, then followed it up with a terrific playoff as well, where he was able to lead the London Knights to an OHL championship. And then they lost in the final game at the Memorial Cup. But again, he was leading the Knights. He had 8 points in 4 games in that tournament. This year, they decided to run it back. He ended up getting a letter. He played for Canada at the World Juniors. He ended up with 69 points through 46 regular season games, and then had an outrageous playoff this year, which was outstanding. In the playoffs, he really, really got it done. 17 games, he had 39 points for the London Knights, and then parlayed that into an MVP-worthy performance at the Memorial Cup. He had 3 goals, tied for the league lead with 7 points. Yeah, he's a champion and a winner, and that's a type of DNA that Brad Shiliving is looking to bring into this group. So it's nice to see that there's some youth, some young players who've been able to get it done and have that type of winning mentality to dig in when the time gets tough, when it matters most. It's nice to see that their top prospect, you know, he kind of checks those boxes.
Yeah, I know like a lot of people were disappointed with what happened at the World Juniors with Easton Cowan, and that kind of was like a bit of a time where a lot of people were concerned about his status a bit as a prospect. Like, is he going to live up to that potential? But I always tell people never use the World Juniors as the base for a lot of players. I have seen phenomenal players at the World Juniors that would go on to do literally squat at the NHL.
Yeah.
So that's such a short tournament. Like, Easton Cowan has been doing this in the regular season, the OHL playoffs, and now
didn't he have that record? He had like 50 something games in a row, split between 2 years, 2 seasons. So he didn't get the quote record, but it was like 56 or 57 straight games where he recorded a point to like end off his draft year, and then picked it right up where it left off last season.
At one point, it was at 62 straight games.
Yeah. Like 62 straight games crossed over between 2 years, but like over 60 games in a row, the guy picked up a point. Like it's just uber productive.
Yeah, and he set the most playoff points in London Knights history. Do you know how many players have played for the London Knights? How
That's
many?
a storied franchise there. Like, think about, like the top players who've played for the London Knights. We're talking Mitch Marner, we're talking Matt Tkachuk, we're talking Patrick Kane, we're talking Corey Perry. Like, this is the most storied franchise in all of junior hockey. And he now is, atop of the leaderboard when it comes to points in the playoff. And he just tied Mitch Marner with his goal tonight in the championship game, tied Mitch Marner for points at a Memorial Cup with 15.
Michael,
Pretty good.
how can you forget former Leaf great Dave Bolland, by the way?
Also, Dave Bolland. Yes. Also, I totally remembered Dave Bolland for sure was a Maple Leaf. Yeah.
And Nazim the Dream, Mr. One, Nazem Kadri was a London
That's
Knight as
right.
well.
He was also a London Knight. That's right. I'm telling you, man, the London Knight, like, that's an NHL factory, and they've done a really good job developing Easton Cowan. You know, like as you mentioned, when he was picked, there was a lot of people who raised an eyebrow over it, right? A lot of people couldn't smell what the Rock was cooking at that point, and he had a great back half and a great playoff. And he parlayed it with an incredible draft +1 season. And then in his D+2 goes on to win the Memorial Cup, gets tournament MVP, playoff MVP. And hey, it's definitely a player who, now that his junior career is done, he's no longer going to have to go back to junior. The Leafs can now either decide, all right, you're going to go to the American League next season, or you're good enough to stick in the NHL. Why don't we take a break? We'll come back and we'll talk a little bit about what his role might be next season, the expectations, the realistic expectations that should be on Easton Cowan, because there seems to be a lot of them. But where should we be thinking when it comes to Cowan and his prospect as a player at the NHL level next year? So we'll get to that. We'll get to Mitch Marner's future, and that could be linked. That could be tied realistically if you think about it. So that's all coming up next here in the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The NHL playoffs are in full swing, and every night delivers highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments. Whether it's a game-winning shot or a breakout player, there's never been a better time to get in on the action. FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game before tip-off and live. With player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays, fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big. You can get yourself a $200 bonus in bets by hitting on your first $5 bet. So if you're new to FanDuel, it's a perfect time to sign up. Head to FanDuel.com, place that first $5 bet. If it wins, you'll get $200 in bonus bets. You can make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the Locked On Network. The Locked On Leafs podcast continues. Mike DiStefano, Dave Morassutti with you, as we are each and every weekday here on the Locked On Leafs podcast, which is free and available wherever you get your podcasts, whether it's Spotify or Apple Music or Pod Stitcher, YouTube. We got the pods going there each and every day, Monday through Friday, all Leafs all the time here in the Locked On Leafs podcast. And speaking of FanDuel, actually, sponsor of today's show, they do have a novelty bet for Mitch Marner's next team, and we'll get to that in just a moment. But it's an interesting cluster of teams that are available to go and bet on. You can use that $5 bet, use it. If you get it correct, you can end up getting yourself $200 in bonus bets. But I want to quickly still continue to break down Easton Cowan. And, we just spoke glowingly about him and the junior career that he had, but junior doesn't necessarily always translate to the pros, right? When you lay at Easton Cowan going into next year, like, what type of expectations realistically should Leafs Nation have on him? Because I've seen a couple of articles that have been written. I'm not going to put people on blast, but they're out there. You can find them, who are trying to pinpoint Easton Cowan as a possible Mitch Marner replacement. And to me, that's just putting way too much pressure on the young kid.
Oh, it definitely is. And I talk, and even some people I talk to, they're like, you have to be, the Leafs have to be as smart as possible with Easton Cowan, because the Leafs have had, look at the players they have drafted and brought into the NHL. How many of those guys were top 10 picks? Quite a few of them. There are certain ones, yes, that have worked out as later picks, Matt Nyes being one of them. But where they've really struggled is getting those second, third rounders to hit and having reasonable expectations on what those players are, right? Like, I look at it almost like what Dallas had done with two players in particular, Logan Stankoven, and Wyatt Johnston. Stankoven was a little different in that he actually went to the AHL for a bit after he played some time in the NHL. Wyatt Johnston went right to the NHL after his OHL career. So if I'm the Leafs, the thing you got to look at here is Easton Cowan will kind of determine his path a little bit. If he comes into training camp and shows he belongs, does really well in preseason, you might get a bit of an inkling. But if I'm Craig Berube and I'm Brad Treliving, you have a little bit of time with Easton Cowan. You put him in the AHL, you make him earn his call up to the NHL and let him spend some time playing against players in professional hockey, right? That's what the AHL is for. Get yourself acclimated to playing against, professional players versus juniors.
So if hypothetically FanDuel had a best bet, right? Like, will Easton Cowan be a Maple Leaf like 10 games into the season, we'll say? Would you be hammering yes or no? Like, do you think he'll end up in the AHL? Like, is that what you think is the more likely path? Or are you just throwing that out there as an option?
I think it's a likely option. I think they want to make sure that he is ready for that jump to the NHL, because they've had him every time they've had him at camp. They've had him right to the very end to see if he can try to show something and then get sent down to juniors, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think he's ready for the NHL. Personally, I would probably say that he's ready for the NHL. Now, is he ready to be Mitch Marner and be in that role and be a 100-point Selke candidate? Absolutely not. But I think when you look at Easton Cowan, the way he plays, right? He's got like a similar skill set to Marner. He's not as like skilled as a player, but he is a 200-foot, type of guy, right? So he's responsible defensively, and often those are the habits that I think coaches would rather you work on in the American League. But if he already has that instinct to play 200 feet, and he has a good shot and he can skate very well, and he's got, very high IQ, I think that translates to the NHL. And he's a little bit undersized, like he's like 5'11" or something like that, like a $185. Maybe, he could grow into be like a $190 or something. But he's a pretty tenacious player. Like, every time I watch him, he's like a dog on a bone. Like, he is a puck hound, and he is really good at getting into you and taking pucks off you in all ends of the ice, right? He's got great puck protection. I think Easton Cowan's ready for the NHL. I just don't want to put the expectations on him that he needs to come in and replace Mitch Marner. That's where I think people need to temper their expectations. Like, and I'm not even saying replace him next year. And I don't think anyone's really necessarily saying that next year he could be that player, but I don't know if he'll ever become that guy. Like, sure, again, similar-ish skill set, right? Smaller guy, has some skill, can play 200 feet, but I don't think he's a top line right winger, an all right winger like Mitch Marner was. So that's just really, I want to temper the expectation a little bit here. I think he's an NHLer. I think he's a bona fide middle sixer. I think there's a chance that he, could play a prominent top six role, but where he tops out, does he be a 30-30 guy? Maybe, like, if that's what he can get to, a 30-30 guy who can play both ends of the ice. I think that's ultimately what you're hoping, right? And he can really contribute into your middle six. I think next year you're probably looking at him as a bottom 9 type of guy. Like, can he play up in the lineup? He probably could if he earns himself that way. But you also trust him play down the lineup a little bit. right? Whereas Nick Robertson, it's a bit of a different situation. You didn't have much faith in him playing bottom end minutes because he wasn't really all that responsible defensively.
Yeah.
So I think it's really interesting. I do believe that there is a path for him to be an NHLer next year, even if more so if Marner walks. That does leave open a spot on the right side for a player of his ilk. But I do want to kind of temper those expectations. If people think he's going to come in and absolutely light it up and be like a Mitch Marner replacement, that to me is a little bit a little lunacy and way above what I think Easton Cowan can be and will be.
Yeah, I mean, you just have to, again, you have to let the player show what he is capable of.
Yeah.
And I think what the Leafs can't do is they can't say, here is, I can't remember if is he a left winger or right winger?
Who?
Cowan?
Yeah. Oh, Dave dropped out. We just lost Dave. I don't know what happened there, but we lost him. He shoots left, but I think he can play. He shoots left, but he can play either side. He can play down the middle too, technically.
He has played some center. I did notice that. I think, yeah, he's more of a right winger center, or no, actually no. Yeah, it's like I think for him, you don't say this is where we think he's going to be. I think you have to let him show you what he can do, and then you go from there. I think there's, as you said, there is a path for him, but I think any sign that it's getting a little he's showing maybe he's just not ready for it on a consistent basis, you have the opportunity to put him down.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's almost going to be a kind of you're going to have to take a wait and see approach a little bit there.
Yeah, which is totally fine. When he was drafted, I remember looking at, and again, not to say that he's going to turn into this type of player, but I do remember looking at a guy like Braden Point, and I looked at Braden Point and what his draft profile was by a lot of experts heading into the draft, and it was very similar to Easton Cowan. So that's the type of game that I think he can give you. But I wouldn't necessarily expect it right away, I guess is all I'm saying. He might be able to turn into a great second line guy, maybe a top line guy, but I wouldn't picture him as a 100-point Selke candidate. Those don't grow on trees. That's for sure. And ultimately, that's why the Toronto Maple Leafs have a really difficult decision when it comes to Mitch Marner specifically, right? Like they don't grow on trees, and do they really want to let a top end guy walk because it is not easily replaceable? You might have an OHL MVP, a Memorial Cup MVP waiting in the wings to take on that role, but it sure as hell is not going to be Mitch Marner, right? He is that player, will not become what Mitch Marner is and what you're going to lose in him. Let's come back and let's talk a little bit about that though. Mitch Marner, where could he go? Is Toronto still in the cards? If not, what are the betting books? What's FanDuel telling us with their odds on his next team? We'll get to that and more next here on the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day. The Locked On Leafs podcast continues. Mike DiStefano, Dave Morassutti with you as we are each and every weekday. Free and available wherever you get your podcasts. You can find the Locked On Leafs podcast on YouTube as well. Hit subscribe and get that daily dose of Maple Leafs content. So Mitch Marner is still technically a member of the Toronto Maple Leafs up until July 1st. They still own his contract, which expires at that point. Whether or not there will be an extension in place by then remains to be seen. Now, there's obviously going to be a lot of chatter and discussion about this. Interestingly enough, FanDuel, our sponsor here on the Locked On Leafs podcast, has put out the betting odds, and you can actually bet on this. They're live bets on Mitch Marner's next team. Would you like to guess, first of all, who the top 5 teams are, Dave?
I'll go LA.
Okay.
I'll go Chicago.
Okay.
Anaheim.
Okay.
Vegas. And think here. Rangers.
The Rangers.
Yeah.
Interesting. So you got 3 out of 5, correct?
Okay.
Chicago is number 1 at plus 30 odds. Toronto is tied in terms of
Oh,
their
I didn't
odds.
even put thing of Toronto. Oops.
Yeah, you did not. You've already moved on
Yeah.
from Marner returning to Toronto, but they had the second best odds, or they're actually tied for the first, the shortest odds actually, with Chicago at plus 430. The Carolina Hurricanes at plus 470. The Vegas Golden Knights at plus 500 are the fourth shortest odds. And then the Anaheim Ducks are the other team at plus 750. So those are the 5 teams that FanDuel, based on the betting market, believes that he is most likely going to. LA did come in at number 6, by the way, so you weren't far off with the Kings as an option. But I find it interesting how they have Toronto at plus 430. Right? How they still have him as a betting favorite to return to the Leafs, or as close as likely to return to the Leafs as he is going to Chicago as the co-favorites. Find that very interesting.
Yeah, I do. I think it's just one of those things where the Leafs haven't fully closed that door.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's always that inkling that maybe something changes within the next couple of weeks, and maybe Marner gets a desire to look at returning. I guess that's where they see it, but I still don't see it, considering all the stuff we've been hearing from the trade deadline on, pretty much. I think it's
Hearing
maybe
from Marner's camp too, right? Like it's not just the Leafs, like from Marner's camp, that he's just been unwilling to make something happen, get an extension in place. Like it feels like he's going to market. Now, it doesn't mean he won't return to Toronto once he tests the open market, but it does feel like he at least wants to go and see what is out there. Right? If the Leafs aren't giving him the exact number he's looking for, will he be able to get it elsewhere? And then maybe he doesn't, and then comes back to Toronto. An interesting team that was discussed being linked to Mitch Marner the other day was the Vegas Golden Knights, which, of course, Vegas is in on a superstar player. But Elliot Friedman on the 32 Thoughts podcast reminded us that Vegas did check in on Mitch Marner last summer. And Toronto wanted Shea Theodore as part of the deal. And obviously, Vegas was unwilling to make that happen. And we did kind of talk about that. Like we heard rumblings about something happening between Shea Theodore and the Maple Leafs and them having interest in what it would take. And Marner, didn't sound like they were willing to go that far. But either way, the trade never happened. But now Vegas may have an opportunity to swoop in and get Marner and not have to give up anything, just the contracts, or possibly like could do a sign and trade, right? Where if they got to get, below a certain cap, do a sign and trade and get him for pennies on the dollar, and it wouldn't cost them Shea Theodore.
Yeah, I'm just curious to know where Vegas is going to get the money for that, for a couple reasons.
Oh, I'm glad you asked, Dave. Continue though.
Because like Vegas has a lot of money kind of spoken for going to next season. Like they've got, and I think 2 years, they got to think about Jack Eichel if they want to re-sign him.
But that's why the sign and trade makes sense for a team like Vegas, though, because then they can give up salary as well. I'm looking at it. I've already put together. You want to hear it? You want to hear my possible trade? So there's been rumblings that Nick Hag, they would be considering moving on from a Nick Hag. He'd be available. So Nick Hag and Ivan Barbashev essentially would allow them to get the money right where they could sign Marner to like a $13 million deal and be under the cap and still have enough money to sign some peripheral guys, still have $4, $5, $6 million to sign some bottom of the end roster players. But Barbashev at $5 million for another 2 years. No, Barbashev has
for 4 more years.
4 more years for Barbashev at $5 million, and then Nick Hag has 1 more year at $2.29 million. But that's kind of an interesting package to me. And like, again, if we're just playing, GM mode, trying to see, okay, what package makes sense, that's one that makes sense for both sides, I would think.
Yeah, like Vegas has a lot of money tied up, and like I look at it as they're not trading Eichel, they're not
No,
trading Stone.
no.
William Karlsson was another name I saw
I
being
don't want
thrown
a
out there.
32-year-old Bill Carlson
Yeah,
who
I don't want a
honestly has been
third line
going
center who's
downhill.
like he's making close to $6 million as a third line center.
Yeah,
If
that doesn't help.
people don't want John Tavares, you're not gonna want William Karlsson. I'll tell you that
Right.
much.
Like, basically, I would rather let Marner walk for nothing than have to take on William
Yeah.
Karlsson at 5.9 for the next 3 years until he's 35 years old, given he had a down season already and couldn't stay
And
healthy.
2+ seasons of him not being able to stay healthy.
Exactly. That's why Barbashev's kind of the only answer. Like, Barbashev,
Yeah, I also heard maybe
hurdle,
Nicholas Roy is another guy that they could
yeah,
be.
I think you need more money though than just
Yeah,
Nicholas Waugh. Like, they just
I
need
do
to give
too.
up
Like
more
that's
money.
why Barbashev does make the most sense. He's a very versatile player. Like he was a guy they picked up from St. Louis that pushed them over the edge to get
Yeah,
to, you know, being a more of a contending type of team, right? He had 18 points in 22 years when they went to the Cup final and won the
yeah.
Cup. Like really good, support type of player that the Leafs. Like if you're talking about a player that you need to go up against the Florida, Barbashev is that type of player.
Well, why did they go after Barbashev that year?
Well, they went after O'Reilly.
They went after somebody who had a Stanley Cup, right? Like, he won a cup, right? He had that winning mentality. He knew what it took, so they went and got a guy who's won a cup, who's a power forward in the league and can play that style of hockey and knows what it takes. And he did that in 2018-19 with the St. Louis Blues, played 25 games in that Stanley Cup run. He wasn't as impactful, obviously. He was a little younger at that point, only 6 points through 25 games, playing a lesser role with the group, a fourth line role. But then he has really come on ever since. He's grown and blossomed into, a great second line option. He had 60 points the 1 year with St. Louis. And this last year put up 23 goals, 51 points for Vegas. But you'll recall that the year they won a Stanley Cup, as you mentioned, 22 games, he had 18 points. And I think that would be something that obviously the Maple Leafs would be interested in, and Chief knows him very well, right? Chief had him in St. Louis for what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years, 5 seasons. He had his best career year, 26 goals, 60 points under Craig Berube.
And that's a player I'm sure Craig Berube, if Brad Shilving goes to and says, "Hey, what do you think?" Probably gonna say, "Let's do it," right? So yeah, it's an interesting one. Vegas is a team that if they want a player, they're gonna find a way to get said player. Like there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it.
Yeah, but you gotta give to get, and for them, it comes down to money. They gotta find a way to get rid of.
And they have
the
no problem
money.
trading somebody, even if they're a decent player. If they means they can go out and get a player they deem that's better or fits what they need better, they'll go and do it. We've seen it.
What about Pietrangelo?
Yeah, you want to keep Shea Theodore. You didn't say anything about Alex Pietrangelo.
Yeah,
Right?
you gave Hannafin a big old contract. If you want to keep Zach Whitecloud around long term, you got maybe Pietrangelo, who's now 35 on the wrong side of 35. He's making 8.8 for the next 4 years. Maybe you want to move on
3
from that
years,
contract.
actually.
The next 3 years. Maybe you want to move on from that contract. Maybe Petro is a possibility.
Yeah, but he's got a no move clause, so he can be like, "Nah, screw off." I like Vegas.
Here's the other thing. Actually, I just thought about this. They may not have as much trouble as we think, Dave. Wasn't there rumblings earlier this year about Pietrangelo and whether or not he could even continue playing hockey? Like, his injury was that severe where he may consider retirement or something this offseason? And if that happens, or he ends up just going on LTIR, or he gets some sort of
I think he had an illness in the playoffs. and he pulled it. I know he pulled. I remember when he pulled out of the Team Canada Four Nations. I'm trying to remember what he had.
Because he wanted to, because he was hurt. He didn't want to get injured.
Into an ailment. And
Yes,
be ready to play for the Golden Knights.
An injury, basically. So I don't know. That's an interesting thing. And I do recall actually there was a story. There was a story here too with it, some family, unfortunate family situations that made him consider retirement earlier this year as well. So that is one other thing too that could definitely make the Golden Knights allow them or open up some cap space if his cap is no longer against you, I guess. That would give them more of a chance to go after a Mitch Marner and not have to do a sign and trade. But regardless, I think right now Vegas is a very interesting team. It just seems like that's something that they do. Like it feels like they should be the front runner right now. And again, FanDuel at 5-1 odds, I might a little sprinkle, a little Salt Bay on that one. I might.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, would be interesting.
Very interesting.
All right, Dave. Really quickly, actually, as we were signing off and getting off the air the other day, for Friday's show, legit, I think maybe 5 minutes after we recorded the podcast, I got a notification on my phone that Maple Leafs assistant Lane Lambert had taken the head coaching job with the Seattle Kraken. So the Maple Leafs will not have Lane Lambert on the bench moving forward. How do you expect this to ripple through the Maple Leafs coaching staff? Anything?
Yeah, I mean, the big one is the penalty kill. That was kind of Lane Lambert's. That was the big one that he worked with. Again, he was also the associate coach. So he was like second in command behind Berube. So like, that's a significant member of your coaching staff you're going to have to replace. But you know, the Leafs when Lane Lambert was hired, I didn't expect the Leafs to go and add a guy like Lane Lambert. I didn't really expect Lane Lambert to be, you know, kind of out of an NHL head coaching position for long too. Like, a lot of teams value what he did in Washington. Islanders, yeah, you can say like he did pretty decent there with what he had, but like what he did with the Capitals is kind of what people were kind of hoping that he could help with the Leafs, right? He played a big part in that. So, yeah, I mean, it's a tough loss, but you know, Seattle likes Leaf assistant coaches. So,
two of the three coaches have been Leafs assistants now.
Yeah, so I'm curious. Yeah, I'm curious who Berube and Treliving try to bring in to. I don't know who's out there.
Well, I mean, again, like Lambert also ran the D, right? And he was the penalty kill coach. Like Mike Van Ryn can just move into that role, I would think, as the guy who could run the D. Like maybe they just roll with like Berube, Savard, and Van Ryn, and Van Ryn is a penalty kill coach. Like they just give him Lambert's duties as opposed to having, you know, an extra assistant behind the bench. Perhaps we have heard that, you know, didn't Keith Pelly mention something about like scaling things down potentially?
It was just more so looking at are we using the resources properly? Like it's like you have so many people and it's like, what do you do around here? Like, what's exactly your role? So, but I think with the coaching staff, you generally, the coaching staff's not what I feel like you need to do that. I think that's more front office stuff.
Oh, I think it is because they have like 18 assistant general managers. I don't know how they do, but they do. There's like 42 AGMs. It's insane. But it's just a possibility where they technically don't have to replace Lambert. They can just put Mike Van Ryn in that in that role and go from there if they really wanted to. Then that'd be like Berube, Savard, Van Ryn. Like that was that was what won a Stanley Cup for them back in the day, was it not?
Probably.
I believe that was the coaching staff for St. Louis back in 1819, if I'm not mistaken. The threesome, the trio behind the bench.
Well, also Mike Yeo was around, but then got fired. So yes.
Well, Mike Yeo got fired, yeah. And Berube went up, and Like, so when they won the cup, there was no Mike Yo. I can assure you that.
Yes.
Yes. I don't know if you're looking that up quickly or not, but
I'm trying to find. Yeah, I'm trying to find the entire coaching staff. Maybe I'm looking
yeah.
at the wrong.
Either
Let's
way,
see. Oh,
it's
Steve Ott was there too.
oh, that's right. Steve Ott was around, was with that team.
So
That's correct.
that staff looked like this. It was Craig Berube, Steve. Oh wait, no, Mark Savard was not there yet.
Oh, did he come after?
Yeah, it looks like he came the year after.
Okay. Either way. Lane Lambert this upcoming season. We'll see what they do, if they do anything to replace him moving forward. Anything else you want to get off your chest? Anything else you want to get into before we
I know there was a
head out?
comment, but question, but maybe we need a little more time to deliberate on it. So maybe we'll do that tomorrow.
Yeah, there was a YouTube comment question. I feel like we kind of answered it though, like in
Sure.
the second segment. Like we kind of
Yeah.
did talk about, Marner and Cowan and whether or not, there's a link there, but perhaps we can dive into it a little bit more tomorrow. Also, a lot of chatter about offer sheets this upcoming summer, and Matthew Nyes' name is coming up to the top of those lists. The Maple Leafs might want to get something done quick because after what we saw happen last year, it feels like teams are more willing to finally do the dirty work and get some offer sheets out there to these top end players. And I would imagine that Nyes would be the apple of a lot of GM's eyes. I think Tree Living's got to get something done prior to July 1st. So why don't we get into that conversation tomorrow? I've got a player comparable that I think makes a lot of sense too, and a contract that I think should work for both sides. So we'll get into those conversations on tomorrow's show. But that'll do it for us here today on the podcast. I'd like to thank you all for listening and supporting the show. You can subscribe to the Locked On Leafs podcast on all platforms and receive daily Leafs content. Follow myself on Twitter at Mickey_Canuck. Follow Dave at D_Morassutti and follow the show as well at Locked On Leafs. We'll be back with another episode for you guys tomorrow. But until then, keep it locked right here on Locked On Leafs.